Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I'm your host, Amanda, and my dazzling co host is.
Like dazzling. I'm Meagan.
You are dazzling today. You look very nice, actually, for anyone who's watching video.
I showered. Thank you. Yeah.
It's always an exciting day. It is. Yeah, shower and hair wash day, big deals.
And my legs too. Credit where credit is due. Okay.
Yeah, no kidding. That's like a not even a monthly occurrence around my home. Okay, so clearly we are your messy, imperfect homeschool mom friends. We are not those influencers who post shiny videos that imply we homeschool with a full face of makeup and are perfectly matched in coordinated outfits, or even that we've recently washed our hair.
Yeah. I mean, truth, right? Do I need to even preface the fact that I show up to record every single episode with pajama pants on? I mean, that's not even a spoiler alert, is it? It's just a given.
Wait, like, doesn't everyone have a system of nighttime pajamas and daytime pajamas? Because I love my daytime pajamas. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
They are life.
Right? I mean, there's no good reason to have real pants when you can wear daytime pajamas most of the time. I'm a firm believer in that. Okay, so something else that definitely sets us apart from the world of homeschoolers whose kids still think babies are delivered by a stork is that we are all about secular, progressive values and beliefs. We are like a unicorn that really does exist. We're like the four-legged narwhal of homeschooling.
Exactly. So if you believe love is love, the only person who has domain over your uterus is you, that DEI makes us stronger as a society, and that trans and Black lives matter, you are not alone. We host a Facebook community with literally thousands of other homeschool parents who share our values. So as lonely as it feels, you are not alone.
Exactly. All right. So today we will be talking about unschooling and math. All right. So oftentimes math is that like sticking point for so many people who are considering unschooling. Now, I'm going to put this out there. This is not my area of expertise. Okay. I'm the aggressive academic homeschooler, and we lean hard into curriculum. We do a lot of curriculum, a lot of organized classes. I don't know much about this. A few weeks ago, I did all about Beast Academy. I know all about Beast Academy, right? I've got that. I don't know that much about how to do full math education as an unschooler. So this is mostly going to be the Meagan show, and I'm excited to learn right along with all of you. So we're going to see how Meagan and other people that she's worked with and she knows in her unschooling communities, how they're learning math as unschoolers, just in her home, in general. She's going to give us a bunch of great ideas. But first, we like to make sure that we start every episode with a recap of our weeks, just so that we can, keep it real for you. We don't want anyone listening to us and being like, oh my gosh, they have the most amazing lives. Why is my life not living up? Like, it's not always amazing. So, how's your week been, Meagan? Besides the fact that you finally showered today.
I did shower, and I had like a little Les Miserables sing aloud while I was in the shower. It was so funny because I had the bathroom door open. One of my kids walked by, and I was like, "Hey, I'm having a Les Mis sing along in the bathroom. If you want to join me," and he was like, "No, thank you." And I was like, "But I was not like you be Jean Valjean," and he was like, "I'm still down." So I did all the parts. I did a great job. I had a good time. So yeah, today's shower was epic. We have been hunkering the last week, and it's been nice. I talked about it last week. I was like, just at the start of my hunkering phase when we recorded last week's episode. We settled in for a 3-week pet sit northwest of London. We're like an hour and a half outside the city. And it was a very welcome break. We had been in London for about a week and a half, and we were just bananas all day, every day. And so this past week has been catching up. I get stressed when I have too much stuff on my to-do list. And a lot of times it's all really little stuff, but it's like it weighs on me, and I feel stressed like the more that I know is outstanding. And so this past week has been Netflix on the TV, sweatpants on, and me just like chipping away at my to-do list. And it feels really good to start to be getting just caught back up again, which is really, really nice. So I got some embroidery time in, and like I've been getting to bed some days at a reasonable hour, and I give myself a great amount of credit for that, and like really pat myself on the back for it. So It's just, everyday life of just like getting stuff done. But that's what you need. So like sometimes you just need an adulting week of like making sure you've got your bills paid and your emails answered and all that kind of stuff. And it feels good. So how
Yeah,
about
no
you? I
kidding.
know, so you've just last week when we recorded, you were like fresh off the plane from Italy. And so jet lag is a beast. So how's it going now?
Yeah. Well, before I get into that, I'm just going to make a quick note and say that what you just described is like my hell for the record. Like the fact that it's like, oh, I put on Netflix and then I did all of these important things. The important things would not get done in my world, right? That's one of those neurodiversity differences happening. Like I would not be able to do anything important if I also had Netflix on. So that stresses me out. All of the other things you're talking about stress you out. Like listening to you do those things at the same time stresses me out.
Background noise is life in ADHD bands.
So I
Mhm.
do get that. Okay, so in my world, for anyone who has chronic illness, they know that you don't always have control over when a flare is going to happen, and you don't always know how it's going to play out. And I was feeling the last time we recorded, I was feeling pretty good about the fact that like, oh, like I'm really tired, but it's hitting me. And so, it should only take a few days because I didn't do too much beforehand. Like I knew and I was really pacing myself pretty well. So I knew to expect a flare, but I wasn't expecting it's totally kicked my ass. It's still going strong. And so that's a real challenge, right? The reality is I get a few good hours of whatever I need to do before my brain is just it's hard for people who don't have this issue to understand. Well, my brain is really just mush and it doesn't matter what I'm thinking. It's not what comes out of my mouth. It's not what comes out of my hands. If I'm trying to type, you look at what the message I just typed and I think that is not what I meant to say. And at this point, I don't actually know how to change it because that's not what I thought I was typing. So yeah, that's been a little challenging. It is what it is. We'll work through it. It's not new in our world. It just so happens that my husband is also out of the country this week for business. So that's made things a little extra challenging. I definitely have some groceries I need, and I'm not physically able to go to the grocery store. And in our life, because we live in the city, usually we have our groceries delivered to the front door. I'm in charge of that, and I just order them on Amazon because it is about 20% less expensive than using the other delivery systems that are available or the other delivery services. And obviously, we're not using Amazon right now. And there's a new all month long boycott, which I'm here for. We're going to do it. It just means that I'm pretty sure this is how bad my brain is this week. I'm pretty sure my husband's coming home in the next few days. I'm not 100% certain when he flies back. But if it's more than like 3 days, we're gonna have an issue. We're gonna have to come up with another solution for getting some groceries. But yeah, so just muddling through. We're recording early in the day, so hopefully I'm still pretty with it. But if by the end of the episode I'm quite nonsensical, just you know, it was a bad day for Amanda. All right, so let's let's get to it, right? Today we are talking about math and unschooling. I don't travel in as many homeschooling circles as Megan does, that's for sure. But I do still see plenty of posts where people say things like, well, we are unschooling ish. We are interest led plus math, right? Or sometimes even plus math and ELA. Just the other day, there was a post from someone saying, I think we're going to unschool. And one of the responses was basically, that's great, but you still need a math curriculum, right? Like, look, I get it, right? I'm a curriculum person. That works for me. That works for my kiddo. But the reality is, it doesn't have to be that way, right? Before I say anything else, before we get into this episode, I'm going to give a disclaimer that I'm sure Megan is going to cover more later. You can unschool and still use curriculum if that's what your child wants to achieve their goals or meet an interest, right? Unschooling does not mean that you deny your kid learning opportunities because they involve a textbook or a structured math class. But it does mean that you don't have to use a textbook or a structured math class if you're an unschooler. So, yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today. How do unschoolers learn math, especially if they aren't using a curriculum? And I think, I think a lot of people will be interested, whether it it applies directly to them because they want to unschool, or if they're in a community like ours where you have a wide variety, a wide spectrum of people, and you just want to better understand so that you're not being quite such a judgy asshole about like, oh, they're not teaching math.
Well, and to your point about like, you are allowed to use curriculum as an unschooler if it's child led. You can do whatever you want as long as it's child led. I had posted something one day in a Facebook group looking for a class on citations, MLA citations. And somebody was like, I thought you were an unschooler. And I'm like, yeah. And my 12-year-old is going to college. So she needs to learn how to cite things when she turns in a paper. By choice, she's going to college. Okay. So like it's okay. But yeah,
Yeah,
the
and she
lack of
won't.
understanding is huge.
Exactly, and she wants a good grade on this paper that she's putting together, and she realizes that she needs to be able to cite accurately to get the grade that she wants, that she put all of the effort into. Like, this is not you being like, "Well, if you wanna go to college, I expect you to know."
And I see those posts too. And I will start off by saying, here's the deal, right? So there's people who are eclectic homeschoolers, which I think eclectic is just kind of code for like a little bit of everything.
Mhm.
And so if you consider yourself an eclectic homeschooler and you are unschooling ish with math or unschooling ish with math and ELA or whatever, listen, if it's working for your family, do what's working for your family. If it's the thing that lets you put your head on the pillow at night and sleep, knowing that your kids, like you're like, I might not completely be screwing this up because they have math and ELA and that's helping you mentally, go for it. I mean, there's so much of unschooling that's just let go and trust the process. And if you're not somebody who can do that today or ever, that's okay. I mean, it's this isn't to convince you to do math this way. It's just informative and whatever else. Take from it what you will. Okay, so I will start off by saying within the unschooling community, and we've talked about this before, right? So unschooling falls under the umbrella of homeschooling. It is a type of homeschooling. There is a very wide range of unschoolers. I have joined unschooling groups that have not felt comfortable for me. And I'm not judging those people. Those aren't my kids. That's not my house. Do whatever works for you. But when I enter a group and people are talking about 8-year-olds that aren't potty trained, not because of any sort of medical issues or neurological thing, just because the child hasn't figured it out yet on their own and they're unschooling to that degree. That's just not our variation of unschooling. And if that's, again, that's your family, you do you. But that's
And
just not
also,
what I'm speaking about today.
yeah, that's not what Megan's speaking about, and the other thing is, if you're listening to us and you're judging that, okay, fine. We can't stop you what you judge. I'm judging that a little, but also I'm going to keep my fucking mouth shut about it. Like, I don't need to go into that space and tell them how wrong they are. I don't want them coming into my space and telling me that I'm the devil for paying for curriculum. So I'm not going to go into their space and tell them how neglectful they are for the way that they're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the way I've chosen to raise my kids. It wouldn't be comfortable for me, like that putting your head on the pillow thing at night, right? And being and
Yeah.
having that peace of mind. I couldn't function in that way, but whatever, right? That's their
Mhm.
jam. So what I'm about to say, there might be some people who say, like, I'm not unschooling enough. If you want to say that, go for it. But just understand that within the world of unschooling, there's a huge spectrum of things. So I think the first thing that I'd love to start off with, and we can Amanda and I share our thoughts, but then I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments as well. Like the goal of learning in general, but then specifically since we're talking about math today, in your mind, Amanda, what is the goal of learning math? Why is your kiddo learning math?
In our house, I think it's twofold. One, I think that there's a lot of math that we use in everyday life that people don't realize they're going to use. So I was in a relationship with someone and I owned the vehicle, but we both drove it. And he was like, I'm going to go fill up the car for you. And I was like, oh, great. Can you just make sure that you calculate the miles per gallon for me? Because I've been tracking that. And he was like, I can't do that. I don't know how. And I was like, what the hell do you mean you don't know how? Like, this is a basic life thing. And that's one of those things. If you never learned algebra and you don't have, then yeah, you're not going to be able to do a lot of those kinds of like figure this out or what's happening with the budget, what happened with the bank account. Like there are a lot of those kinds of things. In our home, I have a kiddo who is very science focused. And I don't I don't know what that's gonna look like because he's also very history focused. He's a lot like me, and that means that he's good at a lot of things and he likes to learn a lot of things, and that's all great. But at 11, I don't know what that's gonna mean for him. And so for me, it's important that he has a strong foundation in all of the things so that he can go wherever he wants to go and he can more easily switch gears whenever he's ready to switch gears. I know there are absolutely people out there who pick something and they stay with it their whole lives. I am not one of those people, and I don't expect that from my kiddo. And so my goal is to just give him a solid enough foundation in math, especially because I feel like that's one of those things that you can't just pick up, right? Like I was always surprised when he was younger and we were doing like testing for gifted programs and things like that, that they weighed the math and how much like how advanced the kid was in math, the same as they weighed how advanced they were in ELA topics. Because I think you can innately be advanced in ELA topics, but it's kind of hard to be super advanced in math if you weren't given those things. Like if you were never introduced to certain formulas or equations or concepts, like you're probably not going to know how to do them. There might be that difference between like you were introduced to it, you picked it up straight away and you took off with it and you could apply it in other ways. But if no one ever told you, you're not going to just be like, oh, yes, I know how to figure out the area of the triangle. Just, like you have to have some kind of an idea, I think. And so for me, that's what our math education in general is really striving towards is this idea of like, let's give a really solid foundation so that you can apply it wherever you want, whenever you need, at whatever point. With the understanding, yeah, you might have to go back and refresh if you get through high school and think, oh, I'm not going to use it for a few years in college. And then, for your master's program or something, you're like, yeah, I'm going to need a refresh there.
Yeah. So for us, mine is quite similar, actually. So it's funny because we're similar. We're just going about it differently, but it's application in the real world. And I agree that there's so much math in the real world that people aren't even identifying as math because they have the foundation and it comes out so easily for them to be able to do it that they're not realizing how quickly they were able to just figure out which box of cereal cost less because they figured out the price per ounce. And it was like,
Mhm.
you just do it, right? But
Yeah.
people don't realize like, oh, that's math. And so you meet people who are like, I never use any of it. And I'm like, well, you don't have, an eviction notice on your door. You've been doing something with
You've been
finances, right?
mathing quite a bit. Yeah.
you know, all that kind of stuff. Like you've paid bills. So yeah, I think math does get used. So for us, it's mostly practical application in the real world. So part of my last thread that I cut to traditional education was the what if he needs it someday or what if they need it someday. And so I talked to a friend of mine who had been unschooling for a really long time before me. And that was my big thing that I was still just tethered to what if they need it and they don't have it. And so it was interesting because she said to me, one of her kids had graduated from her homeschooling scenario and they were 99% interest led. Their kids did formal classes where they felt interests and things like that. One of her kids decided that he wanted to go into this pilot training program that was very math heavy. And she was like, is he going to be able to do this? Right. Because a lot of it had been organic and his interests to that point hadn't taken him to that place. So she said he was working over the summer and he found a math class. It was like an SAT prep kind of class that would cover a huge gamut in a really concentrated form. Took the class, went and did the entrance exam, nailed the entrance exam, got into the pilots program. And it's the same thing. It's like you can be an interested learner even after you've graduated. So if you get to that point where you need it as an adult and you're like, oh, I'm lacking this skill. It's kind of the same concept as your refresh, right? Like if you haven't used something for a while, you need the refresh. Same thing where she was like, oh, he needed it. He found the source. He did the work. He got the skills that he needed when he needed them for the thing he was interested in. So that conversation with her, it's been 7 years, I think. And that helped me kind of cut that thing because she gave me multiple examples with her kids like that, where if they had something that they needed later on, they got it. And she was like, great, they got it. They knew how to source something. They knew how to learn. They knew how to study. They were motivated to learn it. And they did it. So that helped me a ton.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I will say that one of the things I think is interesting for me to think about, and I have absolutely no idea what the answer is. It's easy for me to sit here in this podcast and in this setting and say, I'm an academic homeschooler. I'm a really aggressive academic homeschooler. We cover all of the things because I think it's important. But at the end of the day, it is still in large part interest led by my kiddo, right? We are where we are in our math journey because he likes it and he's picked the curriculum that he wants to use. And so he enjoys it. And we don't have fights over doing it every day or anything like that. And so it is interesting for me to think about where would I come down in this conversation if I had a kiddo who very much wasn't interested in that and would probably never really look at a career in that. Would I be trying to figure out what it means to be doing algebra in sixth grade? Like, no, I wouldn't be there. I don't know where I would be, but I know that I'd be somewhere different than I am now.
We're going to kind of talk about that too, like natural inclination and interest and how that might play out a little bit as well. I have a little bullet point about that in my notes.
Really, sorry, I jumped the gun.
We're right on the same wavelength, though. I love it. Yeah. So, really, our question for today is can you achieve these things just through life, right? So, I'll start out with just giving you kind of a general case study of my own kids, and then we'll talk about interests and hobbies at large and things like that. So, if you're new to the podcast, I have 3 kids. They are 17, almost 16, and 13. And my oldest 2, we'll talk about in a moment. My youngest, who's 13, is, like you just said, Amanda, is a mathy. He is all over it. In the beginning, I was thinking he'd probably end up in something engineering related. Now I'm wondering if it might be something more conservation related, but I'm pretty sure math is going to be in there, right? And pretty heavy math, right? Math to him is like, do you ever go to the Cracker Barrel and they have those little triangle wooden things with the golf keys and you have to
we got one. Yeah. I love
Yes.
that game. Yeah.
right? Like, and it's fun, right? You're sitting there and you're like doing it. It's fun. To him, that's all of math, right? Is like, it's just one giant game / puzzle, right? Is figuring all this stuff out and whatever. So for him, he loved that. He is fully in structured math. He has an amazing math tutor / mentor who he adores. I would never be able to keep up with this kid in math. There's no way. I mean, he aced his first college math class at 12. So he's got his own jam going on. It's all outsourced. He's happy. Life is good because it's his jam. It's still unschooling, even though he's in very structured math. I'll say very structured, but the program he's in is super neurodivergent affirming. So it's structured in the sense that there's a year-long plan, but if a kid doesn't learn one way, it's taught a different way. It's a beautiful neurodivergent affirming environment that works beautifully for him. So that's wonderful. My other 2, though, completely organic, and both of them have gone on to college, have needed math in all of their endeavors, and they're all good. I don't even want to say fine. They're better than fine. They're doing great. So my oldest, who's 17, is his hobbies growing up have been 3D printing, photography, woodwork, blacksmithing, and Pokemon. Pokemon's always been around, right? That's a huge thing. So almost all of his math came from those STEM activities. And we'll talk about the more specific math that's drilled down in there. But it's all there. So he decided to go to college. He went to college early and he went into community college for machine tool technology. Machine tool technology is a tinkerer's dream, if you're not familiar. It's basically in his wood shop, he had a lathe and a CNC machine and multiple 3D printers and all that stuff. And machine tool technology is all of that on steroids. It's really big lathes and really big CNC. But a huge part of that, like one of his classes was blueprinting. I mean, blueprinting is a shit ton of math. I mean, he would bring home these schematics that were really in depth, and he'd be taking these schematics and recreating C-clamps out of metal and out of all sorts of stuff. And he's having to calibrate machines with these measurements and all that kind of stuff. He was 16 in college and on the dean's list and hadn't had formal math. So I would love to offer you something more concrete, but it's that thing. It's that trust the process and let go. And these are not like, oh, my kids are so perfect. If you join an unschooling group of grown unschoolers, you'll find a ton of these examples. This is not just an anomaly situation. It works. There aren't a ton of...
It can work.
Okay, it can. Good point.
It can work. Yeah. I say, because if you join one of those groups or you hit TikTok, you'll find plenty of people who are swearing that it doesn't work at all. So it can work. Yeah.
Good distinction. Thank you. Yes, it can work. Absolutely. And it's interesting because when we're preparing for an episode, we go look for data or studies or whatever. There's nothing that I can find. Absolutely nothing. And I think that that kind of goes with the nature of unschooling. It's a very off the grid hippie type of way of learning. So you'll find roll up reports that have all of homeschoolers and how they perform in math at universities. But it's harder to find something that's specific to unschoolers. So I wish I could give you more concrete information, but if you can find it, great. Link it for me because it's hard. I can't find it.
Yeah. I was actually just reading a thesis paper that was written by someone, and they were talking specifically about the fact that homeschoolers in general like to stay kind of below the radar. So it's hard to get data on them in general, but that unschoolers especially really want to be off of all government radars, whether that's university funded research or, government reporting or whatever. So yeah, I could see how it would be really hard to find actual data.
And I think part of it is just, I mean, for me, it's not even a worry about the government like taking my kids or whatever, like none of that. People don't understand it. And there's only so many times you can have the conversation and try to explain it to people who are so far removed. Even traditional homeschooling is a stretch for them, let alone what we do. It's just to try and get them to figure out unschooling in a general conversation is virtually impossible and it's tiring. So I've given up. So it was funny because at one point we were moving and it was 2020 and we were moving and our house was delayed or we were building our house and it was delayed because of COVID and whatever. And we ended up staying with my father-in-law for like almost 2 months because we had sold one house and our new house wasn't ready. And I brought the kids together and I go, listen, I said, you know how like line's not good, blah, blah, blah. But I go, I got to tell you, we got to make this a little easier while we're here. I said, we're going to say that we've shifted summer break to this 2-month period. And we're going to school in the summer because I cannot try and explain unschooling to Grandpa Martin. And the kids were like, we got that. Yeah, we completely follow you on this one. Thank you. I can't. He would never get it, like in a million years. So, yeah. Okay. Now, my daughter is a different story. My daughter is an artist. So for my son, you could probably say like, okay, well, listen, here's a kid that was doing astrophotography who built himself a polar aligned star tracker. He 3D printed it. And of course, I mean, when you hear 3D printing and wood shop and stuff like that, there's a shit ton of measurements in wood shop and there's equipment and all that kind of stuff. So, okay, fine. You could see where a kid like that could learn math. My daughter is an artist. And so you'd be like, how mathy is this kid? There's a ton of math, I promise. So I actually have her record a video for us that we will put on our YouTube channel and we'll put it in our Facebook group or whatever. If you need it, if you can't find it, send us a message and we'll help you find it. But I'll link it in the show notes when we upload this episode here so that you can find it. But she's working on a project for an upcoming conference that she's going to. And she had just really finished the planning for it in the last couple of days. So I said to her, can you go on Zoom and just talk through the project? Talk how you lay out a project, how you structure it, how you design patterns, how you know how much yarn to buy. In the same way that we said before, somebody who's at the supermarket can figure out which box of cereal is more economical than the other one because of these foundational skills. You'll see that in the video, like where she's like, oh, so I'm able to calculate this, and this. The foundation skills are there, and then she's able to apply them in that video. So when she first started weaving, it was really interesting. Oh, I should say that. She's a weaver, spinner, garment designer. She's done 2 years of fashion school, etc. That's kind of the world she lives in. So she was taking an online class with this woman out of Australia named Kelly Casanova. And the funny thing is, Kelly is a homeschool mom. And she had a worksheet as part of this class that helped you figure out how much yarn you needed for a project. And it was this whole sequence. If you have this times this, it gives you this. Okay, now take that number and multiply it by this. Now take that number and divide it by this, right? And so if you screw it up anywhere in this huge sequence of math problems, you were screwed. And so it was funny because when she first started doing it, she was this little pipsqueak homeschooler. She was like, 11 or something. And she would send her math to Kelly. And Kelly, it was like homeschooling my kid too. And check her math and be like, okay, here, you have an error here. Here's where you get it. And kind of walked her through it. But that was really like the baby steps, the foundation. I mean, when she's doing a dye project, for example, there's so many ratios that you have to figure out as far as chemicals and liquids. And if you're multiplying this amount of chemical, you have to multiply this amount of liquid and things like that. And then yarn amount is huge, right? So the basics of weaving is it's interlaced yarn. If you look at whatever you're wearing right now, you probably can see there's threads going horizontally and threads going vertically. That's the most basic element of weaving you could possibly imagine. And if you've ever been to a museum or a historical center where you see people weaving, they've got the loom set up. So you have the threads that are going from the front to the back of the loom, and then somebody's passing yarn through the horizontal direction. And that's what's creating. In order to figure out how much yarn you need to get on that loom, the amount of math and the density of how closely together those threads are in order to make the type of fabric that you want. Is it going to be a really stiff fabric, or is it going to be something that's super drapey and all of that? It's all math. It's tons and tons and tons of math. And then for her, she designs her own dress is for sewing patterns. So she'll look at a pair of shorts and be like, I could build that, right? And she can go in, she has all the software to be able to go in and create those. And so you're basically taking a measurement. If your hip measurement is 34, I don't know, how are you dividing that up with darts and seam allowances and things like that? So it's a ton of math that gets put in there. So for her, she's also been running a business for quite some time, in part because her hobby or her art form, I shouldn't say hobby, something that was dismissive, her art form is very expensive. She has one loom that she mentions in the video that we'll share where she says it's in storage, and it is because we're still in the process of getting her looms to Europe. It's not easy, but she got a $25,000 loom that she bought herself. I do not have $25,000 laying around to give her, especially because in my mind, I have 3 kids. If I have $25,000 to give her, I need $70,000 because if my other kids want something equally expensive, it would be unfair. So she figured that out. She worked for it.
Only child advantages here. I'm just going to put that up.
I talked to a friend of mine about that because my best friend has an only. And I said that to her, I'm like, I got a car when I turned 17 because I'm an only child. My kids will not get cars when they turn 17. Right? Like there's just definitely difference in a small thing, right? Yeah. So she vended at the farmer's market. She is an influencer on social media. She's a Burnett ambassador, which is a sewing machine brand. She writes for magazines. She gets paid. She's been published like a dozen times. So not only is she learning all of her math through her art form, but then also through business she's paying taxes, she's paying sales tax. All of this stuff is coming along with all that stuff, determining the return on investment for business cards, websites, stuff like that. She's got balls. So there's a lot to it. And she's really strong in math that she didn't get it from textbooks. So it is painful.
Yes, absolutely. So we have more to share. Meagan's got a whole bunch more ideas and points and things like that. But before we get to that, did you know that we offer coaching? If you're listening and you're like, interesting, not sure I really know how to do it in my own home, we've got you. Okay, so it's one of those things like just come talk to us. You can talk to Meagan if you're all about unschooling. You can talk to me specifically if you want to talk curriculum or something like that. If you are like, I like some of what Meagan does, but I really appreciate some of the things that Amanda says, and I think I'm going to fall somewhere in the middle. That makes sense because we're at kind of 2 opposite ends of the spectrum. You can talk with both of us, right? We will drop a link to our scheduling page. It'll be here in the show notes. It'll be in a bunch of random places and on our profile on social media and things like that. You can go check out the times. If something doesn't work and you need something else, feel free to drop us a PM and we'll look at our calendars and figure out a time that will work for all of us. Truly, this is an option for whatever you need to do, right? Meagan builds transcripts. Like she said, 2 of her kids are already fully in college and one of them is taking college classes. She's a whiz at turning great educational experiences into a transcript that people who only speak school will understand. We both love world schooling. I'm a part-time world schooler and I do a lot with points and miles. I've got Megan doing some points and miles, but they have just moved abroad. And so they're truly world schooling at this point. And we're happy to talk about that with you. We had an amazing coaching session with someone who was like, look, I was a teacher. I want to try to do this homeschooling thing, but I think I'm messing it up because we're not happy. And we sat and we had this just amazing conversation of like, here, try this and try that. And, like Megan would do it this way, and I would probably do it this way. And just a lot of different examples and things for her to be able to go out and do just trial and error in her own home, but it was so specific to her and her kiddo and exactly what was going on. And we're happy to help. We're so happy to be able to be there for you and your family because we do this because we want homeschooling to be a success for everyone, whatever your homeschooling looks like.
Mhm. Sometimes it's like when somebody else is explaining something, you're sitting there and you're like, got it. Yeah,
Yeah,
easy. I mean, they make it
totally.
sound easy because they already know how to do it. And then when you go to do it, you're like, "Huh."
That did not go as planned.
And I mean, I've had that experience. So I'm laughing because I get it. So God will help you apply it to you. All right. So I gave you a little case study about my own kids specifically, but I would love to look at some popular hobbies or interests and explore how it's possible to learn math organically through these things. So we talked a little bit about entrepreneurship, which is a great one, but just finance in general, having your kids involved in finances and investment accounts. I mean, you can do penny stocks. You can take an online class. There's virtual stock simulators that you can do where you get like $100,000 and it's all paper money. You're not spending any money, but you can trade. I mean, I have a kid who my oldest has an investment account, and for a while he was doing something different than he's doing now. And he was doing day trading with stocks and stuff. And it was hilarious because we were living in Texas and he's a teenager and he's not a morning person. And so he would wake up when the stock market was going to open, he'd put his trades on and then he'd go back to sleep and then wake up and check his trades later. He had like a whole rhythm that he was doing with the stock market that was hilarious. But get them involved with stuff like that, with bill paying. They are going to need to invest and pay bills in their lifetime. So whether you're learning math through a textbook or not, transitioning that over to the real world, right? You could sit down with them and have them help with your spreadsheet that you're keeping in a month. Maybe it becomes a thing where you're doing it in tandem together where, okay, well, we're a little bit short, or maybe you have money on a couple of different credit cards. Which credit card should be paid? Well, the one with the lowest interest rate is what Susie Orman says, right? So, like, how do you want stuff? Or the one with the highest interest rate? Sorry, I just did Susie Orman wrong there. Sorry, Susie. Grocery budgeting, right? Get them involved, especially get them reading the circulars, figuring out what's on sale. You can go on the website and figure out what's on sale every week, what's buy one, get one free, all that kind of stuff. Give them a budget, tell them to meal plan. They can do all of this stuff and they're going to need to do it when they leave your house. So it's not like child labor
A
either.
little child labor, but it's important child labor.
Right? Taxes. I mean, especially once they start making a little, whether they have a part-time job or something, right? Don't just do them for them, right? Get them involved, have them sit down, know what the forms are, what the different numbers are. Are you a 1099? What's a W-2? All that stuff is super important. Do not fill this paperwork out for your kids. Do not, do not. They need to be involved. Household projects. You're building a deck. They're building a deck. Your driveway needs new gravel. You got to figure out how much gravel you're going to need, what the cost is, including delivery and all that kind of stuff. They're involved in all that stuff because this is real world. So remember the definition of why we learn math from my perspective was to apply it in the real world. So this is the real world application because these are all the things that they're going to have to do. Even if they're not graveling their own driveway, that same principle of needing to know how much of a supply you need and how much it's going to cost will come up again and again and again in life, and making sure that you don't make a really lousy financial decision. Good thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the thing too from this list that's really like standing out to me is we've talked about it before in the podcast, especially in season 1. We had a few different episodes that talked about parenting style and how to respect kids and things like that. But it seems like, especially if you're doing unschooling and math, it is hugely important that you have a partnership with your
Yeah.
kids. I mean, yes, there's a lot of other things that go into it, and it's not as simple as like, oh, we're partners, because you should still be the parent, right? There are times that you have to be the parent, but it's important that that ability to have these conversations and to invite them into the things that you're doing instead of like, well, this is the job of the parent and the job of the child is to be somewhere else and not seen and not heard. This idea of inviting them into your life and your household projects and the management of your home, which is also a pretty progressive thing. It doesn't take very much time on TikTok or Instagram to see video after video after video of people who are like, how many people are not prepared for all of the things that go into a home? This idea that, like, if you actually step back and you teach the kids, like, these are all the things that go into to being a grown up, to
Yeah.
moving out. Just the other day, my kiddo asked, like, why do I have to do that? And I was like, because someday you're going to leave my home and you're going to have to be able to feed yourself. Like, this isn't complicated.
Yeah. All right, gaming and coding. This isn't a huge one for my kids, but I know that it is for so many other people. There's so much probability and statistics and strategy that's all rooted in there. I know we gaming get vilified so much. I don't have huge gamers. I mean, every once in a while my kids will play like Rocket League or something, but I don't generally have that. They play trading card games. That's huge. And the statistics of the probabilities in the trading card games are massive. So from that side, I do completely understand. I mean, even just their ability to figure out their standings because they are ranked in the country and the world. And okay, I need this many points and this percentage. And if 64 people enter this tournament, the odds are this. And if 128 people enter, the odds are this. I mean, it's just the math that they're doing and they're talking to me about it. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I have no idea where you're getting these numbers from, but it sounds like you know what you're talking about. So good job. But it reminded me of this thing. Julie Bogart, who's like one of the queen bees of homeschooling, right? Talked about the fact that one day she sat one of her kids down to give them a lesson on, I forget if it was decimals and percentages or I forget, something in that world. And she's like, I'm going to sit down. I've never covered this with this kid and I'm going to sit down and teach it to them. And the kid sits down and starts rattling off all this stuff they already know and is looking at the paper she has and is like, yeah, like that would be this, that, and the other thing. And she's sitting there going, I've never taught you this. How do you know this? And it all came from gaming. And I'll paraphrase. It's been a while since I read Raising Critical Thinkers, which is the book where she shares that. But she kind of has this moment that's like, how bold of me to assume that the only way this kid was learning math was when I sat down to teach him math. He already had it. So what she thought was going to be this huge lesson was really just gap filling and giving him a little bit of terminology or answering a couple of questions. And then off he went. And he already knew his decimals, percentages, and he was fine. So that was good. Cooking and baking. I feel like these come up all the time. Is it valid? Yes. But I feel like we talk about that, like when we talk to people about like their kindergartners and their early elementary kids, and we're talking about like hands-on, play-based learning, organic learning experiences, cooking and baking come up so often then that I feel like by the time your kids get older, these skills are probably already there, unless you didn't homeschool when they were younger, in which case there's no time that's too late. Your kids do need to learn how to eat and prepare food to subsist.
I will say that I think the difference between doing it as play-based learning when they're young, which we tell people all the time, like for kindergarten, please do this, like preschool, they don't need to preschool, like bake with you, that kind of stuff. But as they get older, it's definitely there are ways to make it much more math focused and oriented. We've all seen the recipe that's like for a family of 8 and you're like, "Well, we're a family of 3 and we only want so much leftovers." So like, let's make this in half. For us, we just spent a few months in Europe and we made my grandma's chocolate chip cookie recipe because we were really desperate for them. And we did a lot of math and work around the fact that grandma's recipe was not in any way, shape, or form aligned with the ingredients or the measurements that we could get in Europe. And so there was a lot of practice of like looking up the differences and doing the conversions and what's the difference between this much weight of flour and sifted flour versus unsifted flour and cups and how imprecise it was. There's just a lot that can be done there as they get older, especially once you start getting into those kinds of things where you end up with fractions and decimal points and conversions and things like that.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely valid. It 100% is. I would look for things beyond that as well as kids get older, though. For
Yeah.
example, like in high school, I would definitely be layering other math skills on top of that, even
Yeah,
if it
please,
was.
please don't just have them bake all the way through high school.
Yes, exactly. If you have a sports lover, which is not really our jam in my household, I mean, we're Formula One. That's about where our sports life ends. But so many statistics, right? So many statistics like batting percentages and all that kind of stuff. I mean, they can learn completely organically. You can encourage them to maybe track their players' progress on a spreadsheet. There's so many things that you could do there. We talked about 3D printing earlier. I mean, there's spatial geometry in there, algebra. There's so many calculations. There's physics because you have to put supports on things that you then later take off and all kinds of stuff there, right? Photography. Over the winter break, we did some unfiltered bites, which were just kind of shorter episodes during all of the holiday chaos of December. And we had a friend of mine on, Audrey, who's this amazing photographer. And Audrey has her master's in engineering. And we'll link that episode here as well. If you haven't listened to it, go, because she talks about how she completely nerds out over the science and the math of photography. Like she goes, a lot of people are in it for the art form. And for me, I'm in it for the nerd factors, right? Like I love the angles and the lighting and the calculations and all that are associated with photography. So there's tons of it there. But you do not have to take our word for it. Or if we didn't talk about your kiddo's activity that they really love, you can find it out. So I asked on Chat GPT, I just did an example. And I just went to Chat GPT and said, hey, my kid is on a robotics team. What sort of math are they learning through the activities of their robotics team? And it broke it out into math categories for me. So the first was algebra and function. And it says programming movements, calibrating sensors, and calculating robot performance. Uses linear equations, quadratic functions, systems of equations. And then it breaks each of those down a little bit more. Like for quadratic functions, it says applied in calculating projectile motion for shooting mechanisms like a robot catapult. So it breaks that down. Talks about geometry and trigonometry used for designing robot arms, angles of movement, and pathfinding. And it goes into angles and circles, sine, cosine, and tangent. We just talked last week or a couple of weeks ago, right, Amanda, about how I find those so useless. Pythagorean theorem is all there. So if you have a kid, like if you had my kid, for example, who's not had formal math, but they're on a robotics team and they're loving it, and you went up to them and said, can you explain the Pythagorean theorem? They probably couldn't. But if you said to them, can you measure the diagonal distances between these 2 points for something to do with the robot? They're like, oh yeah, sure. I got that. Right. They can do it, but sometimes they don't have the formal language if they've learned it organically. And that's perfectly okay as long as they can do the thing most often. Calculus, it says optimizing motion, acceleration, and efficiency. It talks about derivatives and integrals in calculus. Probability and statistics, it says, is used for sensor accuracy, error correction, and AI decision making. And it breaks that down into statistical analysis, error margins, and I don't even know that word, Amanda. Do you?
No, I don't actually know that one.
Oh my goodness. Bayesian probability. This helps robots make decisions based on sensor input. Physics and kinematics in there, understanding how robots interact with their environment. It talks about forces and torque, projectile motion, friction and momentum. I mean, it just goes on and on. There's a thing about graph theory, pathfinding algorithms, coding and computational math. And if you take your kid to robotics every single week and you're like, oh, they're having fun and they've made friends and they enjoy it, right? Not even realizing all the stuff that's built into those activities that's just happening. And if you said to your kiddo, hey, at robotics today, did you do any computational math? What sort of statistics did you work on? They'd be like, I don't know, but they've done it, right? It's all in there. They just don't necessarily equate it in that way. And it's a really effective way of learning when you're just having fun and totally in the moment, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So a couple of last notes before we wrap up. And again, this is my viewpoint as an unschooler and in my particular case of unschooling, kind of the way we live. I'm not me. My kid is 10 and not potty trained camp. It's just not how we've chosen to unschool. So we do have a little bit of structure and a little bit of goal setting surrounding our unschooling endeavors.
And you have way more than a little bit of goal setting. We did an entire episode on that where I sat here and was like, say what? You do how much goal setting? But yeah,
we do like goal setting. Yep. So from my perspective, math is a tool. It's not a destination or a checklist, right? I feel like so much of what we learn through traditional education is, or so we are told, is there to prepare us for practical application in the real world. However, I feel like a lot of times in those traditional learning models, the bookwork ends and there isn't really that little bridge to connect you to actually converting the things that you've just learned to the real world. And it can be rocky for many young adults. And we're seeing that. Amanda referenced it earlier, like how many people are just unprepared for the real world. And I feel like there's certain generations that get picked on TikTok and Instagram and stuff like that. But at the same time, I feel kind of bad because a lot of those people, I think, fell into this time period where all the stuff that's hands-on was removed from school. Sewing was gone, shop class was gone, wood shop, auto mechanics, home ec, all that stuff disappeared from school. And so these young adults have all this book learning, but then they got out to the real world and it was like, well, what the heck do I do with all this stuff? Because there wasn't that bridge that existed. So in the unschooling model of learning math, you're learning most of the same skills, but instead of learning it from a book that then gets converted to real life, you've learned it through real life. So it's just a different way of tackling it. So earlier, Amanda, you said something about if your kiddo wasn't math driven, how different your journey would look, right? And so I think that there's kind of two schools of thought here. If you have a child who isn't drawn to math heavy activities, like what you were saying, right? They're going to pick up the everyday skills that they need to function in the real world, right? They're going to learn budgeting, cooking, measuring, problem solving, things like that. And let's be honest, most of us sat through years of high school math and college math and still didn't enter adulthood with a lot of those practical skills. So even if your kiddo doesn't have a strong inclination towards math, then their career path is probably not going to take them into a really math heavy area. They'll have those real life skills from organic learning. On the other hand, if you have a kid who loves engineering, robotics, coding, tinkering, right? These are my kids. They are naturally going to seek out the math skills that they need to fuel their passions because they're curious. Curiosity is the best teacher. So a kid who just dreams of designing rockets is going to explore physics and calculus because they're interested. They're going to watch documentaries. They're going to get books from the library. They're going to do hands-on projects. They're going to find summer camps that work for them, all of that kind of stuff. And it'll go a lot differently than learning it on a worksheet and then later trying to figure out how to apply that to rocket science. So it's just a different way of learning math, right? There's plenty of kids who learn traditional math that are wildly successful, and there's plenty of kids who don't learn traditional math and are wildly successful. And then there's examples of both of those learning styles who aren't wildly successful. So it's not a matter of one way is a surefire win and one is not. It's all about application. So unschooling largely trusts that kids are going to become who they are meant to be. There's a line in Differently Wired, which is our current book club book, where Deborah Reber talks about focusing on the today and not worrying so much about the future. And so there's a huge part of that in unschooling is trusting that if you have things that interest you and things that drive you, that you will naturally acquire the skills that are required to do what excites you as you continue to grow and unfold as a person. So the learning follows the passion instead of the other way around. And it's just a lot of trust. It's just a lot of like, it works because it works. Let go and see. And I really wish I had more concrete advice for you beyond that, because I know it's really scary.
Yeah. Okay. So, like, I mostly get it. I'm not going to be signing up to unschool, especially math, at any point soon, but I mostly get it. However, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how deep your kiddo needs to engage in these types of activities for them to really gain or even be able to say, like maybe on a high school transcript, right? The reality is, if they're going to do something else, they have to be able to fit into this world that's outside of homeschooling. So how deep do they need to go to be able to say they've got a strong skill set in math or in these things?
So in my world of unschooling and my mentality about this, it's pretty darn deep. You want to be curious. You want to continue to ask questions and seek new information and continuously uncover things and unfold new mysteries. So I in order to put it on my kid's transcript, it needed to be deep. I needed to know that because Otherwise, in my mind, you're falsifying a transcript. Like you are saying my kid took X class. And if they haven't put the hours into that to fully understand that and have that deeply, I didn't feel comfortable with that. So it was deep. But the thing that I will say is when you have a kid who's super interested in something and they have been set free, which is a huge part of the unschooling mentality, you don't even need to tally hours. And so surface level is okay and it's going to be helpful in life. But if you're talking about putting it on a transcript and feeling prepared for higher level education with those skills, I feel like pretty deep is the way to go. But the thing I will say is unschoolers typically don't need a huge push to learn or to follow their curiosity because the way learning has been presented to them has been this opportunity, this gift, this treasure. And so it's not a matter of like, my mom's making me do this thing. So if you're currently in a thing where you're like, I can't get my kid to do two math workbook pages and they're at the table for 4 hours and there's usually tears, it's apples and oranges. It's such a different dynamic between parent and child or caregiver and child. It's such a different outlook on learning. It's such a different, all of it's different. There's no comparison. So, but yeah, we're deep. We're also a household of wildly neurodivergent people, and we don't tend to do things surface level. But if you have a different experience, tell us in the comments. But deep is my answer.
Yeah. Well, and I do think, especially if you're talking about things like transcripts, there are overview classes, and that's not particularly deep. And there's nothing wrong with having an overview class, but it is also important to balance that with classes where they have gone deep as well, so that it's not all overview. Yeah. All right. So before we wrap up, we do want to invite you to our Facebook group. If you aren't there, you're one of the few that isn't at this point, is what it feels like. The world these days, it really feels like it's on fire right now. And every day, like a new layer of chaos unfolds. I'm not even sure. I'm not sure how we're all holding on. And I'm also equally sure it's going to get worse. So
Yeah.
we have this whole amazing, I like to tell people, we're just building a little corner of the internet that is secular and progressive and supportive. And we're just homeschoolers, prospective homeschoolers who will understand the struggles that you're having, some of the fears that you're having, and it's just this amazing, kind, supportive community. And if you're looking for that, we would love to welcome you. If you can't be nice, don't come because we're not going to let you in. I'm tired of people being mean. I'm tired of people showing up in my DMs mean. It's not happening anymore. But we will put the link in the show notes. If you want to just go on Facebook because you can't be bothered with the show notes, I get it. I hate looking at show notes. Search Homeschool Moms Unfiltered on Facebook. And then if you filter for the groups, the group is called Homeschool Moms Unfiltered, Secular and Progressive AF. Okay, that's the group that you want. You have to fill out a few questions, answer a few questions, and wait to hear from us. Sometimes we need to have a conversation with you, and we'll let you know that in a message if necessary. But yeah, we'd love to see you there.
Yeah, we would. I love it. Well, we shall end our episode with a mantra as always. So we'll say, whether it's spreadsheets or blacksmithing, robotics or running a business, when kids follow their curiosity, they'll learn exactly what they need, exactly when they need it. Trust the process and trust your kid.
So yeah, I won't be doing that, but I do still appreciate learning more about the way other people homeschool, what makes their kids tick and really how they're thriving. So I thank you for taking the lead today and sharing both some personal examples and some bigger picture things for other folks. And we hope that you listening found it useful. And until next time, happy homeschooling.
Have a great day.